Okay, good afternoon, everybody, and welcome back. We hope you had a good lunch, and now we're gonna go straight to business and go into our third session of this seminar. We're now going to move to a more technical topic on the role of statistics in payments and financial inclusion policy, because, as you know, numbers and data are the best backup for any discussion. Remember to share your comments and photos on Twitter under the hashtag ecom4dev, and also invite your colleagues who couldn't join us today to follow us live on YouTube through the channel Comics Communication. I want to welcome here on my left side Mr. Michael Ferrantino. He is the lead economist in the World Bank Trade and Competitiveness Global Practice, and also Mr. Torbjörn Fredriksson, who is the head of the IT analysis section at UNCTAD. Michael holds a PhD from Yale University, and he has published research on a wide array of topics relating to international trade, including non-tariff measures and trade facilitation, global value chains, the relationship of trade to the environment, innovation, and productivity, among others. And Torbjörn is, among other things, responsible for UNCTAD's annual Information Economic Report, leads the E-Trade for All initiative, and for 8 years was one of the principal authors of the World Investment Report. He holds a Master of Science in International Economics from the Stockholm School of Economics. Both panelists and experts will give an overview of the existing initiatives to improve digital economy, statistics in the area of payments and mobile money. And we will afterwards encourage your participation by discussing additional data points to help understand the national situations and the trade and non-trade related policy priorities that should be considered. So after saying this, I would like to give the floor to Michael for his intervention. So you have the floor. Thank you very much, Michael.
Thank you.
Microphone, please.
There we go. So we always, in any area of policy, especially a new and emergent one, we are looking to make recommendations on what to do, not only on our instinct and expert opinion, but on an evidence-based basis. And so inevitably, we want to go about collecting data so that we can measure this, and that can be a great source of progress in this area. Since this is a new and emerging area, there are a lot of challenges, but there are two types of things we'd like to measure. The first is how much e-commerce is going on in the world, and second, what are the features of the enabling environment that, if they exist more of or in higher quality, might encourage more e-commerce. And so I'm going to try to give a brief summary of what it is that we think we know right now and how we're trying to disseminate more information for the global community. So in conjunction with the E-Trade for All initiative, which Torbjorn is going to be talking about, we are putting together a set of E-Trade for All indicators. In fact, they're put down, they are put together. They are very close to release, and these cover not only payment solutions, which you see there in the powder blue, but 6 other things as well, because we're spending today talking about how important payments are, but other things are important as well. For example, ICT, infrastructure, and services. You have to be online to do anything online. Do you have a mobile phone? Are you on the internet? Trade logistics and trade facilitation. This not only includes the traditional topics in trade facilitation that you think of when you think of the trade facilitation agreement, things having to do with customs, but also things having to do with the mail and postal service, because this is an important part of the e-commerce environment, which is present in some places and absent elsewhere. E-commerce skills development. Are firms used to using email, ICT, and whatnot in their daily business? Legal and regulatory frameworks, and you've heard some discussion of these this morning. We have a few examples of each of these variables here, and in this case, some of the examples are simply binary things. Is there a legal framework in a given country for electronic transactions or e-signatures? Is there a data protection framework or a consumer protection framework or laws related to cybercrime? And just, this is, again, a first attempt to pull these things together. If you're actually a legal expert in any of these topics, then you would probably want to know not only is there a consumer protection law, but what protections does it contain? So this is just an entry point. Access to financing. Is working capital financed by banks, for example? Do firms say that they are constrained? And then e-commerce readiness assessment and strategy formulation. What we do actually is pull together several other indices which have already been put together by different organizations. UNCTAD has an index of e-commerce readiness. The International Telecommunications Union has an index of ICT readiness. And the World Economic Forum has one of network readiness. So we provide these indicators and show, along with all these other sort of individual standalone bits of information, over 30 of them, that, so you can build your own index and just look at things one at a time. On payment solutions, I want to make note of the fact that this conference has actually given us an opportunity to improve this product. You only see measures here of debit cards, credit cards. You might ask about mobile money. We looked in mobile money for one place, didn't find it. And it turns out that there are data on mobile money in another part of the World Bank, which is a typical sort of thing. when you've got 10,000 people, you don't know what everybody's doing, So I've just contacted my office, having learned this at lunch, and we do plan to have mobile money in the database. So here's some examples of some of the things we can find out about payments. This, by the way, comes from a large survey-based data set called Global Findex, which you can find online and access. So this is just a taste of that. And so this is a share of the population 15 years and over with a credit card, and it varies widely. And it's not only that in some countries there's very little credit card access, and in others there's a great deal. But even among high-income countries, the use of credit cards varies a lot more than you would think. And we see actually that the prevalence of e-commerce varies as well. We can ask about debit cards, okay, and that information is there as well. And you might think that in a country where 40% of the people have credit cards, 40% would also have debit cards. Well, that's true in Bahrain, but in Armenia, about twice as many people have a debit card as have a credit card. And we can look at another dimension of this as well. Sometimes people have these things, but they haven't used them in a year or more. And we have separate variables that capture whether or not people have used their credit card or debit card in the last year. So we are rolling these things out through several means of dissemination in the next 6 weeks or so, so that there's two different platforms. One is the Trade and Competitiveness Data Portal. There's the link up there, tcdata360.worldbank.org. You'll find a lot of nice country data there right now. You can do things like look at time series map data. At the World Integrated Trade Solution, WITS, which is probably familiar to anybody who's had to handle a lot of merchandise trade data, and at the eTrade for All online platform, where the data will likely have a different look, like a series of country-specific PDFs. And so there will be additional functionality added to the eTrade for All indicators in every one of the portals, depending on what is the style and which data is traditionally portrayed there already. Now, here's the big question. What we'd like to do, if we have a good picture of the e-commerce environment, is to say which of these various indicators seem to be really closely related with having a lot of e-commerce and which seem to be less relevant. In order to do that, we'd like to be able to measure e-commerce, how much is going on. And here is the part which is a good deal more challenging. And what's being measured here is the dollar value of retail e-commerce, or what's sometimes called B2C, business to consumer e-commerce, in selected developing countries. And I want to call a couple of things to your attention. First, that everywhere we can see this, it's growing really rapidly. So the blue bar is 2010, the orange ones are 2015, and in Indonesia, over in this five-year period, e-commerce looks like it more than doubles every year. In Brazil, which starts off a higher base, it doubles every 3 to 4 years. Now, why do I show you these particular countries? It turns out that even a basic measure like this, how much are consumers buying online, is only available, as far as I can tell, for about 3 dozen countries. And so in terms of developing countries, I've basically shown you the ones that I have other than China. And the reason that I don't show you China is that China does perhaps over half of all the retail e-commerce buying in the world. And if I put that on the graph, everybody else would become very difficult to read. So what are the challenges in terms of measuring e-commerce itself. We can do a lot with the enabling environment, but what can we see? As I just mentioned, right now, I can only see measures of e-commerce for a few dozen countries, and they're usually retail e-commerce. They're not standardized. For example, if I look at what the EU puts out in Eurostat, they may tell me what percentage of firms sell something online, whereas the United States may give dollar values of how much of every type of commerce is e-commerce, and then may break it down by sectors. So there's not an international data standard for this stuff. And a lot of the data are in private hands, which is why some of our most valuable lessons about e-commerce, such as the fact that it enables SMEs and enormously reduces trade costs and so on, are things that we've learned from academics who've managed to partner with online platforms like eBay and get their private data. In fact, these figures are not official figures here at all. You'll notice there's a source there, eMarketer, so that's actually data that we had to pay for to get access to that. Now, another question that people ask are how much business to business or wholesale e-commerce is going on here. And this is where our ability to see, to have any sort of radar for what's going on is frustrating, because in what we think from a couple of data points we have is that business to business e-commerce is much larger than retail e-commerce. Maybe it could be a factor of 5, maybe more or less. We can only see that maybe for 2 or 3 countries. For the 130, 140 countries for which at least I don't have a figure for even how much retail e-commerce is going on, it is probably going on practically everywhere, okay? And the reason why I wanted to show you the growth for the countries I could see is that quite often people say, this isn't even an activity in my country. There are no jobs being generated by e-commerce. And if, for example, if I take the example of Brazil, and if somebody is selling $14 billion worth of whatever it is that they are selling through this method, I don't understand how that generates 0 jobs, okay? And so anywhere we work now, my first question is already, what is already going on? So we're in the process of developing a project at the World Bank called Digital Myanmar. And my assumption isn't that nothing is going on in Myanmar. My assumption is that once we start to look, we are actually going to find a couple of intrepid entrepreneurs building platforms, selling goods and services against incredible odds where their environment isn't enabled. And I want to talk to them first to find out what constraints they face. Another limitation is that we don't know very much about how whether e-commerce is cross-border or domestic. And of course, at the WTO, we tend to focus on international trade. That's something that we need to know more about. And again, with a few exceptions like the United States, we don't know what kinds of goods and services are being traded. So we're very far from having anything on e-commerce that looks like the merchandise trade data, but at least we know what we like. And so now that the discussion is starting to be underway in the international statistical system about how could we go about collecting data like this systematically and perhaps recommending a data standard for countries who want to do this the first time, at least we have some idea of what's on our wish list. And that's what I have for now. Thanks.
Well, Michael, thank you very much for a very interesting presentation. I think you have clearly highlighted what is that we can measure, what is available today, but at the same time, pointing out the challenges ahead and the things that we need to deepen the understanding in order to continue to understand better how all this affects countries and trade and so on. So now I would like to turn to Torbjörn, who will present on payments for e-commerce and some reflections on this matter. So thank you very much, Torbjörn, and the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Mr. Ambassador. It's great to be back again among the friends of e-commerce for development. I'd like to thank the Friends of E-commerce for Development for taking the initiative to organizing this seminar, which I can tell from the attendance here has a lot of interest here in Geneva. Also, many thanks to Michael for a very informative presentation. Maybe I can just, before going to my planned presentation, just add some brief reflections on some of the work that we're doing now in UNCTAD on trying to dig deeper into this statistical challenge of e-commerce. And for instance, one of the countries that is really making a great effort in collecting data on e-commerce is the UK. And they have recently come up with new information and that is quite revealing. For instance, we have also had this tendency of equating more or less retail e-commerce with B2C, business to consumer e-commerce. The UK data show that that is not really feasible. In fact, in the UK, it only accounts for about 25% of, coming out from the retail sector. And a lot of it is coming actually from wholesale businesses that are going straight to the consumers. They're jumping over the retail stage there. They're still business to consumers. Our data suggests among the top 10 countries of the world in terms of e-commerce markets that B2B is probably about 90% of the total, 90% of the B2C plus B2C market. So underlying again the enormous importance of B2B. And then another challenge here that we're facing is, of course, how to collect data in this area. If you approach the consumers, you get one type of information, but you will only reach the B2C or C2C aspect. If you go to enterprises and ask them who they are selling to and so on, you may be able to capture both B2B and B2C. So that is perhaps something to keep in mind. Now, what I would like to do in my presentation is just to share some other types of statistics and pieces of information that may be relevant as we think about the role of payments in support of e-commerce in developing countries. And just to start by stressing that payment solutions, as many of you are aware, is one of the 7 policy areas of e-trade for all, the initiative that we launched last July. And we are very happy here to work closely with the World Bank as the leading agency, I would say, in the area of payment solutions. Now, if we look at just some scattered evidence that we have in this area, you can see, for instance, in South Africa here, that 1/3 of the internet users who do not make purchases online, they state that they do not trust online payments as the second most important reason for not engaging in e-commerce, and which underlines then why we need to pay attention to the payments dimension in the case of e-commerce. We recently did some work also in Cambodia, and there you can also see the top bottlenecks identified by the stakeholders that were interviewed and surveyed during late 2016. And you see that the 4th highest, but it's actually from 4th from the bottom, is the lack of payment methods for e-commerce. So again, it features quite highly on the priorities of countries. You may have noticed that one of the indicators that Michael included in the e-trade for all indicators of e-commerce readiness was related to credit cards. And this is, of course, an area where we, thanks to the World Bank, have quite good data on the availability and use of such cards. But it's also that we can see from the work of WorldPay that credit cards and other cards, they are lumped under the heading of credit cards here. So this actually includes both credit and debit cards. Is the most popular way of paying for business to consumer e-commerce around the world. And you see that in 2014, credit cards and other cards accounted for more than half of e-commerce payments in terms of value. And then you see that another 22% was accounted for by e-wallets like PayPal and other methods. The projection, though, is that by 2019, the share of credit cards will have shrunk below 50% and that the e-wallet aspect will have grown. Another thing to observe is that there is a small slice called Other, and under that heading you have the mobile money payments, and that is also growing a little bit from 5 to 7%. But you should also note there that cash on delivery is not expected to decline in the relative share of all e-commerce payments. And we heard this morning that in a number of countries it's still like 90% of all e-commerce is paid by cash on delivery when it comes to business to consumers. Maybe it's worth noting here also that this is, again, e-commerce, domestic, cross-border, what have you, it's e-commerce. But if we look at some other recent studies that have looked only at cross-border e-commerce for consumers, then there's a slightly different picture. And the e-wallets aspect is actually the most important. This was a study that was recently produced by the International Post Corporation in 26 countries, only looking at cross-border e-commerce, where PayPal and other e-wallets accounted for 41% of the payments, and credit cards were in the second place at 33%. So that is perhaps also something to keep in mind, that there may be different scenarios here and different preferences when it comes to cross-border elements. The mobile money we talked about this morning, and this is just to show this is the latest numbers from GSMA, and we can see this rather dramatic increase in the number of mobile money deployments around the world. And I think the latest number for 2016 is that there are 277 such deployments. And what is interesting is, of course, that most of these are in sub-Saharan Africa and in South Asia, really reflecting the need for additional financial services or solutions in these markets. The GSMA is also looking at what kind of activities are undertaking on the basis of the mobile money, and you can see that a bit more than 2/3 is basically people-to-people transfers still in these systems. So it's not really e-commerce as such, but you can see that what is called merchant payment accounts for almost about 5% of these transactions, and I think this is an area that is growing particularly fast in the mobile money world. Then we also talked about this morning about that there's no one-size-fits-all, and I think this slide is pointing in that direction. You can see in China, for instance, Alipay is the most popular solution for online shopping, where 68% of online shoppers are using it, and only 16% of the population in China has actually a credit card. And the Alipay is like an escrow accounts solution, which is very popular there. In Kenya, of course, the mobile money is more important than credit cards for e-commerce payments, but cash on delivery is still, at least in the numbers that we have, which went dated back to 2014, then cash on delivery was still more important. But this is, I suppose, just a question of time before that changes as well. And I included Brazil here. I'm not too familiar with Brazil's situation, but just to illustrate that there's a lot of innovation going on here, how to connect what's going on online with what's going on offline. Vosto is an online game developer, and they have partnered with about 150,000 physical points where people that are active online playing their games can go and buy credits to engage in these games. So then you connect the offline and the online world in this area. Now I'm going to skip that in the interest of time. Now, we noticed that, especially for cross-border and for business to consumers, the platforms, the e-wallets, are very, very important as a mechanism for making payments for e-commerce. And of course, the most widespread and most widely used in this context is PayPal. And these data are not fully up to date, but the principle remains that not all countries have access to PayPal accounts. And there are different types of accounts that PayPal offers. And if you are a merchant and you want to sell your stuff online, you really want to have a business account. And this has other implications also. I understand, for instance, from eBay that they will not localize their activities in a country if you cannot have a business account in that country. So it has sort of repercussions of the status of PayPal's presence in a country. This is something that one should keep in mind, because that makes it easier if you're in a country where you have a personal account to buy from someone, but it's more difficult for you to sell to another country to get financial compensation. Let me end with two insights from our work in Cambodia, what kind of bottlenecks that were identified in terms of the payments landscape. It's very much related to the cash-based society. Point of sales payments are only available in US dollars for the time being, which makes it difficult for many local people to get engaged in these electronic transactions. Cards, to the extent that they are used mainly for cash withdrawals at automatic teller machines. There is currently no shared national switch for card-based electronic payments, so there is not the interoperability in place. Only one bank offers access to deposit accounts via debit cards. And a lot of people are flagging the high costs and risks of credit card processing. So this is a range of issues that are arising from dialogues with stakeholders on the ground in Cambodia. And when they are asked what should be done to improve the payment situation for e-commerce, then the most popular two examples are that is related to educational initiatives on security and trust building for policymakers, banks, merchants, and consumers, and regulations that allow for mobile payments. Then we also ask how important would it be to receive technical assistance in this area, and then the top one is the educational initiatives, and followed by clear and interoperable consumer protection regulations in this field. And this question of technical assistance is asked simply in Cambodia because we want to see how we can feed this kind of information to the work that we're doing in the context of e-trade for all. This is a commercial. The payments dimension will be further discussed during the e-commerce week at the end of April. And I should stress that together with the World Bank, we will also have a session on measuring e-commerce more broadly. And I expect that both these sessions will zero in on how we can make ourselves more effective in supporting developing countries to addressing the various challenges that we are facing in this area. Thank you very much.
Well, Torbjörn, thank you very much for a very good and also very informative presentation. For me, it was very interesting to note several things that you mentioned: the relevance of B2B transactions in e-commerce, the difference of payment methods when you compare domestic to cross-border, the different pictures that this is taking in different countries, and also, of course, the last part about the bottlenecks that have been identified for e-transactions in specific countries. So after these two very good presentations, now I would like to open the floor for questions of the audience. We have here these two experts, so it would be very good that we take advantage to ask them any questions. If you could please identify yourself by name and occupation before asking any questions. So the floor is yours.
Thank you. I'm Suleiman Audu from Nigerian Mission. We do appreciate this very interesting and very insightful presentation. Just a quick question as to the status of the e-commerce readiness assessment. Similar to trade facilitation prior to that, there used to be an encouragement that each country should undertake its need assessment and priority. And I want to know whether there is collaboration between UNCTAD and the World Bank in terms of what countries need to do in terms of ensuring that their e-commerce readiness is something that can guarantee their ability to be able to effectively engage in the process. But more importantly, what is the status of the ongoing work? Is it on the basis of request by members, or there is a particular focus on certain countries? I mean, where exactly are we in relation to that? And I think it will help if we can ascertain the status and to see how we can follow up on that. I think.
Yes.
Thank you very much for the question, and I'll start. Maybe Michael wants to add something on this. Very good question actually, and very timely as well. As far as UNCTAD's work in this field, I'll start with that. We can offer two kinds of support in this area. We have a program that is labeled ICT Policy Reviews, where we can go quite in depth into countries to help develop, for instance, e-commerce strategies. And this is what we have basically just concluded with Egypt, and that strategy will be presented during the e-commerce week here in Geneva, in the presence of the Minister of ICT. Then we are also doing that kind of work with Rwanda for the time being, and we have requests from a number of other African countries. And then we're talking about like a year-long exercise where we really go into the depth in all relevant areas and try to come up with concrete recommendations for the governments how to move forward, how to improve, and engage with the relevant stakeholders either inside the country or external partners. But UNCTAD is not an expert in every area of e-commerce. So, for instance, in the case of Egypt, we had excellent collaboration with the World Bank, who helped us with the payments module in that context. We also had close collaboration with the Universal Postal Union to bring in the role of the post in this area, and also, of course, inputs from the International Trade Center on the question of SME capacity building, and other partners. But these are long-term activities, and they are a bit costly. So sometimes it takes a little while to have the funding mechanisms in place. And this is, of course, an encouragement to all the donors to be generous. Then we have also developed, which is more of along the lines of what we did with Cambodia and also Bhutan, which we originally said would focus only on the least developed countries, because we see that that's where the greatest needs are right now, to enable the least developed countries to have a basic understanding of where they stand in terms of e-commerce or e-trade readiness. And here we have developed a project proposal, and but I cannot announce anything yet, but we have very strong indications that some donors will come to our aid, and which we expect will allow us to roll out probably another 5 or 6 such assessments during 2017, especially in the LDCs, and hopefully around 15 in 2018. But we haven't approached the least developed countries yet in terms of encouraging them to request such assistance until we knew that the funding will be available. But as soon as we do, we will encourage member states that are interested in approaching us to seek that kind of assistance. But in parallel, we also have some other donors that are showing interest, and we will see if we cannot also expand this effort to reach beyond the LDCs to other developing countries. So there are like 2 tracks. One is the rapid assessments that would take about a month to complete in a country, and this bigger e-commerce strategy development, which is like a year-long exercise.
Thank you very much, Torbjörn. I think Michael will also like to comment on this.
Yeah, and I would like to reemphasize what Torbjörn mentioned, which is that actually to get a hold on strategy formation, it's important to look at a lot of things in depth. When you get the indicators that we just described, the intent is to cover the whole world as best we can, and the thing which somebody could do at their desktop is probably most fruitfully some comparisons with countries in your region or at a similar stage of development, and then you can say, oh, well, we seem to be a bit ahead on payments, but maybe not as far on how many people have the internet in the first place, or entrepreneurial skills, or trade facilitation. But generally, in order to integrate these things, it's important to actually engage not only with governments but with entrepreneurs and find out what is your perception of the greatest impediments, because statistics alone don't necessarily do this. And I will say that in many cases where we have an engagement in the World Bank, and we have engagements in most of these areas that the indicators cover, there's at least some subject matter expertise. The country already has some idea what their priorities are, that their priority is infrastructure, expanding broadband, and, can they talk about a loan for undersea cable? Or sometimes it is, building a trade information portal, possibly for some of their work in the trade facilitation agreement, and that will involve the team that does that looking at the national internet law, or an activity having to do with entrepreneurship will generally not only be country specific, but it may operate through incubators and accelerators and become actually firm specific and entrepreneur specific. And so what we actually learn from countries as to their own perceptions of their priorities is at least as important, and probably more important, than what one can simply just extract from indicators.
Well, thank you very much to both of you. Any other questions? Yes, please, with that.
Pierre Sauvé from the World Bank. This is a very sobering discussion, in a way. 2017, we are not able really to say what share of world trade takes place digitally. And it's not your fault, of course, but it's a real challenge for policymaking. I remember early on in the Uruguay round when we were discussing services, I remember the Indian ambassador at the time. India was very opposed to the very notion of discussing services multilaterally, and he said, how can we negotiate what we cannot measure? And I wonder to what extent does the paucity of data stand in the way of more coherent rulemaking in this area, because there is seemingly momentum building up in doing something about e-commerce, but how much of an impediment to doing something useful is held up by the paucity of data? And a second point is the role of investment. I didn't really hear much about investment. A lot of e-commerce, I suspect, but I'm not an expert, takes place within national markets rather than across borders, and it occurs through foreign investment serving e-commerce domestically, either because of policy or for other reasons. The examples that Juan gave us this morning in finance, where I thought were very revealing of a lot of operations where banks are establishing, or other types of financial institutions are establishing beachheads in different markets. There's not much trade between these beachheads necessarily, except in some market segments, but investment is driving e-commerce. And I was wondering if you could perhaps say a few words about whether or not we're trying to measure investment flows in digital trade or in digital activities.
Thank you very much. Michael, would you like to comment on that?
Yeah, well, I mean, to some extent, we may be able to measure investment flows in, information and communications technology, but that's a sort of different thing. I would say that some of this activity is definitely driven by foreign investment. So, for example, Amazon is building warehouses in India right now, and yet as they do this, they go into competition with domestic platforms like Flipkart, who are doing the exact same type of things within the country. So that goes on, but then at the same time, the nature of e-commerce is such that the investment doesn't necessarily, a lot of it, have to take place in the buyer's market or whatever. One can do e-commerce in a given country as a foreigner, if your server farm is buried under the desert of New Mexico, so it's not the sort of thing you'd think. At the same time, there is an enormous amount, I mean, this is all anecdotal, but there are a lot of country-specific platforms. There are a lot of city-specific services. If you live in a metropolitan area where you can go online and, have your lunch delivered from hundreds of restaurants, there are urban centers in developing countries where the same sort of activity happens, and that's all domestic. So I actually don't feel like I'm in a position to say X percent of this thing we cannot measure is like associated with FDI. That's sort of more unknowable.
Thank you very much, Michael. Torbjörn, your turn to talk about this very interesting way to look at things.
Yeah, because it's a very good question. It's fundamental in a sense here. And it is unfortunately the case that we don't have good data in this area after all the talk about e-commerce. But to be fair, it's only, I would say, in the past 3 years that we have really started talking about e-commerce in earnest here in Geneva. So we're seeing a rapid increase in the interest here, and that is also why the lack of data becomes so glaringly apparent, I would say. You asked specifically if this is a problem for rule-making discussions here. I think first and foremost it is a problem for countries in terms of any kind of policy making in this area, because if you cannot describe what the benchmark is right now, it's very difficult to also identify what I need to do to improve, and also to measure whether what I'm doing is actually having the effects that I would like to have in this area. And of course, if it's difficult at the national level, it becomes even more difficult to then agree on international policy making in this area. We are trying with our colleagues in other international organizations to address this area. We have there was a discussion on this at the G20 meeting recently in Berlin, and we have set up a special working group with the WTO, with UPU, with the OECD, and we're hoping that the World Bank will soon come in as well, to focus specifically on cross-border e-commerce. Very few countries have data on this area, and those that have are mainly from developed countries. We have two interesting examples from Canada and Spain. And the interesting thing there is that in both countries, about 80% of the e-commerce that they report is domestic. 15% in the case of Canada goes to the US, and 50% in Spain goes to the rest of the EU, and 5% goes to the rest of the world. So that's grosso modo what the picture looks like from those countries that have this kind of information.
Let's take a second swing at this.
Yeah.
Sure. So just thinking about economic institutions, I mean, as much as I want better data, it isn't clear to me that there is an automatic requirement to have measurement in order to have rulemaking. What you have to have for rulemaking is to understand what the phenomena is. In fact, there have been rules about commerce about international commerce for centuries in the absence of measurement. There were an elaborate set of rules to operate the Champagne Fair in the 14th century, and I think no data on how much business was transacted there. And if I could pick a more relevant, possibly contemporary example, there was a government procurement agreement in the early 1990s. And I think if you look up how much international data there were on government procurement in the early 1990s, you can't you won't find much, but all that was needed was at least the countries who participated in that to understand what happens when governments buy things.
Thank you very much, Michael. I think Torbjörn wants to comment again on the investment question. This was a very good question, by the way. So
just on the investment issue, there, it's absolutely right that in many developing countries, it's a foreign owner or foreign equity partner, at least, that goes in to invest in the country. Like Jumia was supported or has been supported with Rocket Internet from Germany, and there are a number of services-oriented e-commerce companies in Africa that are supported by Ringier, a Swiss company. But for all these companies that are considering whether they want to invest directly in e-commerce or in the ecosystem of e-commerce, in transportation, payments, and so on, having better data on the landscape of the ecosystem for e-commerce will be very valuable to assess the risks and the likely profits that they can make from this. So it's not only important for policymakers, but also for decision makers in business. And that's why we want to have these rapid assessments now off the ground, so that we at least have some kind of a baseline information in more and more countries.
thank you very much. I have a question here from Ambassador Valerio.
Thank you. Just a brief question concerning cross-border. Customs in some countries must know what's going on this, because there are some limitations going on in some countries. There are thresholds on the value of the transaction. There are also limitations on the number of transactions that an individual can do and buy abroad, and there are limitations on volume in some countries too. So, in some ways, probably local commerce won't appreciate too much the increase of this kind of trade. So we have to be careful on this too. I'd like to listen to some comments on that.
Yeah, sure. I think, so at the World Bank, we actually are working with about 40 countries on implementation of the Trade Facilitation Agreement. And there is actually a lively awareness of the link between trade facilitation and e-commerce. That we know, for example, that restrictive de minimis requirements that require calculating the duty on very small shipments are discouraging of e-commerce, and we know that a customs regime that privileges large containers over small parcels is similarly not going to be good for e-commerce. And so operationally on the ground, when we have an opportunity to work with a country on customs reform, these issues come up. That doesn't necessarily mean that we know anything about these data issues. Customs can be aware of this, and yet if a shipment comes into the country and there's no question on the, what's the word I'm looking for? On the manifest, if you don't actually ask the shipper, did the customer buy this online or did they call you on the phone, then there's no mechanism to collect that data, at least through customs, which is why the data that we have in a lot of these cases, I think, are attached to instruments like surveys of manufacturers or surveys of retailers or wholesalers.
Just to add a couple of points here. You're absolutely correct that the customs is a huge source of information here. The problem right now is that the way that we collect information on the goods flows across countries, there's no question on how it was ordered. And that means that we lose the e-commerce angle to it. But there is very interesting work there being done with the World Customs Organization and UPU, and I think there is also some thinking about how to improve that situation, to add a question to capture better data. That would be wonderful. The other thing is, of course, as Ambassador points out here, especially in Latin America, developing countries, we have seen that cross-border e-commerce actually accounts for a much larger share, and it's mainly in terms of imports. And that is a concern for many countries, but it sort of again underlines the importance of seeing how one can strengthen the ability of SMEs and other firms in the Latin American and other developing countries to engage also as exporters in the online market.
Thank you very much. I think there is a question over there. Thank you.
Gracias, embajador.
Thank you, Ambassador. I am just benefiting from the interpreters to ask my question in Spanish. All of this about data leads me to think that we also need a definition of external trade, at least an operational one. I don't know whether you yet have an operational definition, both within UNCTAD or within the World Bank, just to give us some guidance on what it is we need to measure, just a definition of e-commerce.
Okay, that's a very good question. In fact, we during the meeting that I mentioned at the G20 in Germany, we devoted many days to discussions about digital trade. But there was no consensus on what digital trade is because there's no clear definition there. And it was sometimes clear that we are coming in from different perspectives. On e-commerce, there is actually a relatively clear definition from a statistical perspective on what e-commerce is. It is if it is ordered online. It's a bit more complicated, but if it's ordered online, it counts as e-commerce. Then it may be delivered offline or online, and it can be paid for offline or online. But if it is ordered online, it will count as e-commerce. However, in this house, the definition or the description of e-commerce that was presented for the purpose of the work program on e-commerce is much broader. It can be paid online, it could be ordered online, it could be delivered online. So it has a looser description. And I think that is for reasons of being able to talk about all aspects of this. But I think one issue that is of high importance for the discussions here in WTO and elsewhere is to find out more how much of the trade that is delivered electronically. Because that will be the closest link, for instance, to the electronic transmissions dimension, I think that is referred to in the context of the moratorium. Here, UNCTAD also in collaboration with partners has developed a new methodology to measure what we call ICT-enabled services trade. And the only way we have seen to actually come up with this is to go around and do enterprise surveys in countries and simply ask them how much of these services are delivered electronically as opposed to by someone traveling to the other country to deliver it or by someone coming to you to buy the services. And we are rolling now out pilot studies for Costa Rica, Egypt, Thailand and India this year. And we will take stock at the end of this year. Then we would hope that we can do this on a larger scale for countries so that we actually can have an estimate of how much of services trade is actually delivered electronically, which we don't have right now. The first country to test this methodology was the United States. And they basically reorganized their statistics from the BOP statistics and calculated the share of what they call digitally deliverable services, not digitally delivered services, because they don't know. They haven't asked that question, but they say this is the maximum amount according to the data that the methodology that we have proposed that could have been delivered digitally. And I understand at least last time I spoke with colleagues in the Department of Commerce that there could be opportunities for the US to do something to also go and ask the question how much was actually delivered there. But this is an area that I think more countries will need to look at.
Well, thank you very much. I was wondering if there would be any other questions. If not, then I would like to thank you both for the very, very good presentation. I think that we have seen how this matter of the statistics and the numbers is very important. I guess it was important not just because of the answers, but also because of the questions, because then you can see how many things are still pending to have a clear picture, and it's so important in this discussion. So thank you very much again, and also to the audience for the questions. And now, as we move on our seminar, I would like to we will continue discussing what attracts digital financial services providers to offer services in developing economies. This is a session that will be chaired by Ambassador Banerio of Uruguay. So I invite him and the next panelist to please come to the podium. Thank you very much.
Well, shall we start, please? We start a bit early, so we can leave early too, I think. Unless there are a lot of questions. Good afternoon, everybody. Excellencies, speakers, and members of the audience. It's a great pleasure for me to moderate this session, this last session of the seminar. Remember to share your comments on photos on Twitter under the hashtag ecom4div. It's a new word for me. And also invite your colleagues who couldn't join us today to follow us live in YouTube through the channels in the slide. In the next hour, we will hope to explore what payments processors, non-bank financial services, and consumer and SME facing at payment services look for when they are deciding which new markets to invest and operate in. This session will highlight the minimum legal frameworks and trade commitments these firms need for regulatory compliance purposes in the home markets, and how essential it is for that national regulatory choices foster competitive markets in such services. I'm joined here in the panel by Mrs. Maeve Quigley from Ingenico Payments, where she leads the company's expansion into the e-commerce sector. She consults many of the world's leading e-commerce companies on global payments solutions, and is a frequent speaker on using payments to scale businesses in new markets. Mr. Gustavo Macó is Senior Manager of Payments and Fraud from Geo Euro. He has over 10 years of experience in multiple sectors of e-commerce, optimizing payments and multi-currency processing strategies while preventing fraud losses. And last but not least is Ms. Mina Mashakivi, who heads the trade negotiations at UNCTAD. Previously, she led the Division of International Trade at UNCTAD. She has held senior policy-related and leadership positions at the UN and advised developing countries and emerging market leaders on the international trading system, multilateral and regional trade negotiations, and joining WTO as well as on trade policy and services sector policies. Well, now let's start with Maeve. I will hand you the floor for your presentation.
Thank you very much, Ambassador.
Microphone, please.
Thank you. I'm so used to talking to a big room without a microphone, so. I'm with Ingenico ePayments. We're a global payment service provider. So I'm curious, anyone in here ever bought a ticket online on Air France or KLM? Little show of hands, yeah? Anyone in here paid for Skype using something not a credit card? No? Okay. Yeah? A couple people? Let's see. Anyone booked a ticket on Priceline before? Yeah? Has anyone ever been to the Apple store and bought something? So, pretty much, well, I know that Apple, it's a little contentious. Some people are Apple, some people are Android people. But we are the sole supplier to Apple Store for terminal solutions. And we have a global online payment processing solution. So what I want to talk with you about is how ePayments really serves e-commerce companies to scale. And what I hope that I can achieve by connecting with you today is to help you go back to your countries and advise e-commerce companies on how to, and the ecosystem surrounding e-commerce to be set up for success. So e-commerce companies in your country can grow and scale. So just a quick snapshot of a visualization of our online payment solution. We have 65,000 customers globally and growing. We operate in 170 countries and in 150 and more currencies. And you see there a kind of snapshot of the payment methods as well that are integrated onto our platform. Just a little idea. And our company exists to help e-commerce companies go further and break boundaries in what is possible. We have a lot of different range of services focused on user experience, technology, payment capabilities, back-end financial operations, advising on fraud, and providing lots and lots of expertise as well. This is really kind of the heart and soul of our company, is using our data to help e-commerce companies grow. So the 3 questions I want to tackle together with you all today is what's the role of payments in helping e-commerce companies to scale in new markets? How can e-commerce companies be set up for success along each of the stages of their growth? And also, what makes a country more attractive for a PSP like us to expand into? And I hope you all have a lot of questions. I'm high on, I love engagement, So how does ePayments, how do payments help e-commerce companies scale? Well, this is actually the key problem that we're working on solving, that we see 20% of payment requests aren't completed at the checkout page. So essentially what we see is that people work so hard, they build an e-commerce company, you work so hard to bring in a consumer, want to buy your product, they go through the whole thing, they select it, and 20% drop off at the payment page. That's a lot of lost revenue. And basically what's behind that, what we see, these are the main reasons that consumers report as to why they're dropping off on the payment page. So interestingly, you can see here that it's a combination of user experience factors and availability of the right technology. So really, then what's an e-commerce company to do, right? So essentially what our approach is we have a huge warehouse of data from all of the merchants who process on our platform, and we anonymously aggregate this data into business insights. And what we can do is we can see consumer behavior across the board in different countries around the world, preference for payment methods. We can also see performance on the payment methods, how the authorization on those payment methods is, and what are the factors that affect authorization. Because really why we all care about payments is that it's where the rubber hits the road for e-commerce. It's where companies make money. And so what we try to do is to help companies figure out the best way that they can make money online. So this kind of leads to, then you get excited, like, great, all right, I'm on board. Well, it's not always that simple, because the thing is it's not just having the right payment technology in place. It's also about e-commerce companies themselves being a good partner to the financial network and being in alignment together. So basically, in broad strokes, this is what we see is the stages of companies growing. So companies start, the first box there, they're small, they have low revenue, they're validating their business model, they're in an incubation stage, they're trying to figure things out. And once companies have an established business model, some traction in a core market, usually companies then really are ready to start looking at expanding and growing. So that might be expanding in your national environment, or it might be expanding into new countries and new markets. And that's a stage that's really focused on scaling. So companies at that stage need a lot of insights into what's consumer behavior in other markets, what are the requirements for me to enter into those other markets. So that's where we step in and advise. And then companies, we say the unicorn there, and I know that might be confusing to some, but these are kind of common terminology in the tech startup world that I work in quite a lot. So after companies are scaling, they kind of hit this like really successful level of growth. And this is before they've IPO'd or maybe sold the company. And at this stage, in this really is a revenue optimization stage. So again, companies at this stage really need to be focused on how can they really fine-tune the mechanisms at hand to improve their revenue. They're no longer maybe looking to scale in new markets. They just want to improve their revenue outcomes in existing markets. So the two boxes here, basically you see there's like a blue and a red, and where we step in is really at the red box stage. But I want to talk as well, because the linkage between these two stages is essential for an e-commerce company to have success. And there's a lot of things that need to happen in the early stage that's out of our reach, because companies are very small at this stage, that they need to get ready in order to scale and grow. So basically, like key things that we look at that are real kind of success indicators for companies that we want to partner with. And I just want to clarify as well, like we are a service provider, but really payment processing is truly a partnership. Our revenue outcomes are tied to the revenue outcomes of the businesses that process on our platform. So what we look for are companies that have a good size and a matching geographic footprint. And we look at their volume and how it's growing. We look at their business model and what type of business they have. And we also look for the risk level of the business model of these e-commerce companies. Matching risk is one of the most essential stages of assessing whether or not an e-commerce company is a good fit. And I think Gustavo's going to talk about that. And the third thing we really look at is the viability of this business to thrive and survive and grow. So those are some of the indicators we look at. Do they have a continuous improvement mentality? What's the level of chargebacks, which is actually an indicator of customer satisfaction and whether the company is actually delivering the goods and services that they have committed to deliver. We look at the level of refunds, which is another indicator of customer satisfaction. And we also look at the cash flow, the financial health of a company. So this is like the cornerstone of how we're looking at the right e-commerce companies that are ready to grow and scale in new markets. And I hope it gives you some ideas about how you can nurture these features in e-commerce companies back in your countries. So what makes a country as well attractive for e-commerce and e-payments localization? I know that there is a lot of demand in countries that have e-commerce, and they want very much to have payment solutions, but the global players aren't there yet. So it's tough. I definitely recognize that balance or that challenge. So again, with these kind of three pillars of, and I know the font there is a little bit small, but I think the slides will be passed around. So what we see, kind of some things that support these three pillars. I would say really start with nurturing small e-commerce companies to thrive in their local environment and create a local payment ecosystem which reflects global standards. This just fundamentally helps companies in that early stage to get set up for success to start with so they can scale and grow. And then supporting the right business models. I know there's a lot of talk in here about the right legislation, and a lot of this has been covered already, but one of the topics that hasn't been covered is the role of governments in determining what are appropriate online business models, in particular with marketplaces. And this is a challenge I really throw to all of you in this room who are policymakers, because online marketplaces, what we see, reflect about 50% of consumer choice, but online marketplaces are not clearly understood from a regulatory standpoint, and we see some governments have such risk-averse policies that it actually is really hindering online marketplaces. And my suggestion is to really think about the online payments environment in the same way you think of a physical environment, that, marketplaces are one of the oldest ways of doing business that have existed. Villages in the mountains of Laos have physical marketplaces where small businesses show up in a spot and they know that they can sell to people at scale. And I think that one of the key things, if I were to suggest anything, is to find a way to support online marketplaces to succeed and scale, because I think it's actually one of the most human business models that exist. And the third thing that's been discussed quite a lot, which I'm glad we're seeing the same thing both from a business perspective and from a policy perspective, is having consumer rights protected, terms and conditions enforced, the right kind of import-export tariffs, and the right kind of transportation and delivery infrastructure. And that's already been covered earlier, so that's great. How do we look at assessing a country for expansion? First, we look at the economic stability. A lot of those things, the infrastructure, rule of law, taxation, and the local payments infrastructure, non-national financial policies on e-commerce. And we look at the economic growth of that country and its potential. We look at how fast, not necessarily how big a market is, but how fast a market is growing. So that is a lot of work can be done at that small local level in order to attract more international financial service providers or payment service providers. And then finally, we look at what e-commerce companies are growing and flourishing in that market. And of course, we look at, as I just explained, companies that would be a potential good long-term partner for us. So if you want to learn more about us, little plug, you can check out that link. You can learn a lot about our technology, and also if you want to be in touch, really encourage you to be in touch. And thanks very much for your time and attention.
Thank you very much, Maeve. I'm going to ask Gustavo to give us his insights on this. Thank you. You have the floor, Gustavo.
Thank you. I don't actually have a presentation or anything, because it's I think I'm bringing more of what is my personal experience, and it seems a little bit surreal sometimes when I have actually been working with this industry for over 10 years, and it's something that I'm not only very familiar with, but the amount of actual data, like even Maeve presented, and things that we do and that we have to base a lot of our decisions are things that are basically out there. I think, like Maeve brought up, sort of bringing up a challenge is the fact that we're definitely dealing with something that is new, something that have been, just growing very organically for the last 15 years even, and that has come from the point of view of actually fulfilling individual needs within the market. I mean, you have payment methods. Again, in her slide, one of the biggest reasons for people not actually completing a transaction was not being able to find the payment method. And the reason for this is you have countries that, depending on their own culture, depending on how they actually see economy and how they see all this, they have created a solution that at some point sort of just, became widely spread. My experience has been sort of working with the fraud part of things. So it's say, okay, so how are all these things being misused? What are all the opportunities that we are opening up for many of these things to be used for things that shouldn't? and there is a whole other level of complexity that I was having small talk earlier, and I think to actually grasp the idea of the impact that the whole e-commerce market has, it's a very complicated idea. It's something that I think a lot of people also underestimate how every single layer that is sort of part of the process actually has something to contribute and something to take away from it. For me, for many years, until I actually was asked to come and join you and give you some of my own experience, countries at some point became a name on an Excel sheet where a risk factor next to it and a potential for profit next to it. And the thing is that the risk factor is not just a randomly assigned number. I mean, we're talking about, okay, when me as a merchant, I'm actually processing credit cards, and I have, like it was presented before, 54 or more % of all my transactions coming via credit card, and I decide to work within a specific jurisdiction that doesn't have the infrastructure to actually probably control some of the risks that are happening there, I may actually be put out of business by fraudulent activity that is coming from that country, because at some point Visa and MasterCard is going to look at me and say, okay, I'm sorry, I don't care what your reasoning is. You know, this is why I think it's acceptable for you to actually have as transactions that are considered fraudulent, and that's what it is. So what I think, and I'm going to follow Maeve in sort of issuing a challenge, is it's sort of everyone stepping up and understanding how much the implications of everything that you have to do it affects this. And it's not only you, but every other person that is a player in this. And I think also merchants are sort of greatly underestimated. You have so many different organizations, you have so many different people working with their best of intentions to motivate the market to do things that are actually going to impulse things. But I see it sort of as a little bit of a tug-of-war of everyone trying to bring the same thing to a point from different directions. And my challenge would be that let's try to bring all that together. I mean, I think there are great people doing sort of a lot of hard work, but probably not focused on the right direction. And especially in that sense, like it was mentioned before, the private sector, the people that have actually dealing with this. I mean, we probably have a lot more answers than that you may have questions. The problem is that, yes, the way that data is generated is not through a lot of the sort of usual ways of recording data. These are things that probably even are going to take even farther steps to understand. But again, we're dealing with something that no one has dealt with before. We're dealing with things that at some point Envoy comes up with a way to start transferring money within the EU, and it's taken by the traditional banks to the European Court, and the European Court has to step back and say, okay, I'm sorry, I'm not going to give a ruling on this. You need 10 years to figure out what it is actually that's happening here. And I think that's the main point. It's a thing of collaboration. It's a thing of everyone understanding their part and their impact on that.
Thank you, Gustavo. I think protection from fraud is a key part of development of e-commerce
The thing is,
and the construction of trust. No?
yeah, but there is two sides. I think traditionally the fraud has been seen as sort of the goalkeeper that is just trying to keep everything that's bad out. One of the things that I've been developing on and trying to focus on the last few years is what it's basically positive fraud management. So instead of focusing in who's bad and who I don't want to be part of, coming part of who I'm doing business with,
it's actually okay. Let's not do that. Let's see who are the good guys in here. Let's see who are the people that I actually want to do business with. And one of the main consequences, especially with Go Euro, where I'm working right now, when I talk about acceptance rate, I'm talking about from the total amount of transactions that are submitted, how many do we accept? And how many do we accept from the transactions that are either declined by the banks that have their own fraud systems, and the transactions, sorry, that I decide, okay, these are transactions that I want to be able to handle. By sort of changing the focus and actually saying, okay, these are the behaviors that I want, these are the good things that I want in my users, we have been able to dramatically increase the acceptance rate of Go Euro. We have been able to actually open up to many, many countries that in a different way would have blocked. Right now, we're actually processing payments for over 150 countries all over the world, where at some point it was kind of limited to just the European Union because it was sort of the safest part of the market to work with. But I think even within the payments industry, that is part of the evolution. It's at some point, okay, it's not just about keeping the bad people out because that is not effective 100%. It's at some point, okay, let's see, how can I do it the other way around?
Thank you very much, Gustavo. I think we need to look at trade rules, specific, which support investment, market access, and competition. And I'd like to pass the floor to Mina, who is an expert on that issue. You have the floor, Mina. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'm coming last, which is very difficult because many of the things that I was going to say have been already talked about, but as it's, I think it's good to go back to basics again and maybe remind ourselves a little bit again of the policy environment and the trade policy environment and also reality of the ground. So I just first would just, I think DG Azevedo referred to the fact that there are 7 goals in the SDGs which talk about financial services in a more focused manner, but 11 of the goals relate to financial services in general. And we see that, of course, ending poverty will very much rely on the new technologies and financial services. Ending hunger would, to ensure secure and equal access would involve financial services, including in agriculture sector. Achieving gender equality would very much mean that women would have access to financial services. Again, digital financial services would be relevant here. Economic growth and employment to support productive activities, diversification, structural transformation, we need access to financial services and financial institutions to encourage and expand access to banking, insurance, and financial services. Infrastructure. The linkage between the different sectors of infrastructural services, whether it's telecom, financial services, energy, would all be related to each other, and would be financial services would be very key in actually building the infrastructures, industrialization and innovation. And here, again, universal and affordable access to the internet is mentioned. Goal 10, reduce inequality. We see that there's need to improve the regulation and the monitoring of global financial markets and strengthen the implementation of this regulation. And we see that in one particular area, it's asked to reduce to less than 3% the transaction costs on migrants' remittances and eliminate remittance corridors with costs higher than 5%. So here, again, financial services, but digital financial services could be very helpful in reducing these costs. And making sure that these remittances would then be plowed into some investment products that could be helpful in the country. So the more also new products are developed by the digital financial services providers would also be helpful in broadening the range of access to financial services and the specific products that of course, in this case, migrants would need. And we know that remittances represent an enormous amount of funds that could be mobilized to help diversification and structural transformation, and it's even bigger than ODA. And in terms of means of implementation, we refer, of course, to the trading system and ensuring that we have a fair and universal trading system. There is also a reference to enhancing policy coherence and enhancing the use of ICTs, and of course in this respect also the combination of ICT with financial services would be key. So why policy coherence is key? Because I think also the panelists here, but also all of you have referred to different parts of the puzzle of the jigsaw, but what's important is to bring coherence amongst all the actors, the private, the public, and also to ensure a lot of regulators are discussing these different kinds of regulators. So to bring coherence across this and transparency to what each one is doing would be very key. Now we also discussed, the role of financial inclusion, and we see that what's important is to address the development inequalities of firms in developing countries. Only 34% of firms have a bank loan, 55% in developed countries, and informal firms, 80% of MSMEs are informal firms in developing countries, which face major challenges in financial access. So again, when we are talking about e-commerce and digital financial services, we have to keep in mind the reality of the situation, and then how other firms, for example, what we were discussing in Genico is proposing, how these firms could all scale up and then be able to use the solutions that are proposed by the different actors in the private sector. So here, I think we heard also how the role of government would be very key, and the enabling environment. And it would also be very key to have the right data, as we said, to have the right policies, to also ensure that, business would be able to operate and they could also access data to be able to operate in these markets. The financial inclusion, of course, needs to consider trade in financial services. Cross-border exports in financial services reached around 540 billion in 2015 with an annual growth rate of 7%. And we see, of course, that developed economies account for 84% of the global exports, but exports of developing countries are growing faster. So again, in the ecosystem of trade, we have to, note that developed economies are the ones that are very much global exporters here. And of course, there is growth in developing countries, but there's a lot of heterogeneity, and some countries are more successful than others. And we, of course, heard the experience of Kenya, which is very successful in this respect, the financial services through the digital means. But we also heard how everything is in place for Pakistan to take off, but there are some major ecosystem issues that have to be dealt with. For example, when we heard that there are only 11,000 ATMs in Pakistan. So we see a lot of bottlenecks that have to be dealt with in this respect. Now, also we heard about inequality. So this financial exclusion, we have to also be aware that 83.3% of total wealth is concentrated on 8.4% of the world population. And so those who have in terms of inequality would have less wealth would of course not be able to use all the opportunities that are out there. So financial exclusion is a major problem. But the underprivileged form a group with potential to attract innovative financial services and products to benefit from them. And they represent about 40 trillion in terms of wealth, so collectively. And this, of course, would mean that, they have a potential to attract innovative financial services. In terms of financial inclusion, that it has progress, but gaps remain. And major gaps that we see and what would be good is both for the private and the public sector to focus to some of these on some of these gaps. For example, the women who are left behind, or youth, and we see that youth are very active now in actually getting into entrepreneurship and coming up with the innovative ideas, but then they have a problem to access credit and to access financial means to be able to start up and scale up what they're doing. So I think this is also an area where we need to give attention to, both in terms of private sector and public sector, in terms of women and youth. There are a number of variety of obstacles that we heard about also, which not only affect financial inclusion in terms of the brick and mortar banks, but also digital financial services. Why use of financial services has been limited, lack of disposable money, exclusion from physical, economic, administrative, and psychological barriers. We also heard, like, if people have to, at the end, go to, a bank, or distances are far, and sometimes even though they're using some kind of digital product, they still need to produce the cash in paper format. So all of this would be very much obstacles not only to the traditional financial services, but also digital financial services. So as I think everybody here has said, digital financial services would be very key. It has positive externalities. It incentivizes use of banking services by establishing linkages. Information on mobile money usage may help credit scoring. It is more gender neutral and youth friendly, allows for sectoral development, and we see that its cost is much less in terms of the infrastructure. But they are not a panacea, so we had an expert meeting in UNCTAD on financial inclusion, and also we saw that the infrastructure gap would very much has slowed down the broadening of DFS. We also see that there's a major gap in establishing infrastructure investment, and that also affects ICT, energy, and financial services, although not all the gap relates to the sectors that we are looking at. But nevertheless, when we talk about everybody, coming together to help progress of digital financial services, the infrastructure still is an issue that has to be put in place, and having access to electricity would be a major issue also. Of course, we know that the green economy is going to help, and the green energy would help. But still, that's not yet very much democratized. So the more access to energy can be expanded, I think that would facilitate digital financial services. We also see that engagement between regulators and operators for increased usage, because we understood, like, there are, you open your bank account, but you're not using it because the poor have more difficulty in using these accounts, and they deal more in cash. So how to ensure that the poor people without an access to technology are not financially excluded, and that they can be provided with this access to technology, but also in terms of literacy, have financial literacy, and more specific solutions would be put in place for women, youth, and elderly, and in terms of disabilities. There are a lot of success stories, but it doesn't mean that they can be replicated. We talked about Kenya's success story, and therefore there is a lot of heterogeneity, and what's important is to help individual countries to be able to devise their own solutions, whether they want to be bank or MNO-centric, and depending on the environment, ecosystem that they are faced with. And again, we find that here it's very important to bring all the stakeholders in this area together, and to ensure that the different approaches would not cause fragmentation and would not cause problems in scaling up access, and also to ensure that I think our Kenyan participants very ably put forward that what was good for Kenya is not necessarily good for everybody, but also I think World Bank set the principles, that those principles would be very much important to implement. And to implement those, of course, there is the need for establishing the infrastructure, establishing the technology, building awareness, advocacy, and education. There is, of course, risk of fragmentation of standards, and that would be very important for the operators to ensure that standards do not become barriers also for developing country operators. So some of this is very specific in terms of how you can remove, remaining challenges, for example, to bulk payment, because this morning we discussed that maybe when you're, kind of forced to use certain types of services, you will start, moving into this environment of digital financial services in a more easy manner. But there are still remaining challenges in terms of specific to bulk payments, issues of moving from cash program, cleaning enrollment data, gathering KYC information system integration, and reconciling payment records. Interoperability is a key issue. In terms of B2B payments, increase in digital financial inclusion, again, we see that the remaining challenges is that it's difficult adoption among companies wanting to avoid taxes and regulation, cash-starved businesses and users of post-dated checks with e-payment money leaves accounts faster, which may lead to reduced working capital for small businesses. Facilitated business credit could lead to overextension and usurious practices. With facilitated e-payments and credit processes and potentially improved creditworthiness, risk of over-indebtedness may increase. We heard about microfinance. Microfinance through the digital mean may have what it already has as sometimes a negative impact, that you over-indebt and it leads to major risks. So cross-cutting remaining challenges are availability and reliability of energy, ITC infrastructure services, issue of data privacy related to collecting and processing data, fraud and security risks to payment systems, lack of technological knowledge, liquidity to agents and to users that still cash out is relevant, resistance to change and bureaucracy linked to know your customer requirements, sound agent networks and interoperability remain critical. Proportional regulation is required to involve disadvantaged users. So we have to be very careful not to over-regulate, but also not to under-regulate. Payment services and DFS in general depend on trade and investment and on competitive and interoperable markets, and thus require sound trade and regulatory environment. So in the focus group in ITU, very much there was a focus on how the telcos could be putting in place the right enabling ecosystem for trade and to attract investment. So it actually brought all stakeholders together to discuss what could be the right ecosystem for DFS, and this is what they came out in terms of, kind of in a small format, what could facilitate DFS providers and DFS provider support services and the user cases. So you need, of course, that there would be infrastructure readiness and an enabling environment which will focus on regulators, financial inclusion policy standards, and bodies. So I put this because we heard about what PAFI had done, and this also is an important initiative that ITU has taken with the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, bringing together everybody to ensure that there would be infrastructure readiness and also enabling laws and regulations. Again, the idea was that digital liquidity is required for trade and investment in e-payment, and that to ensure that we keep money in e-money form rather than cash, we need to not cash out. So again, this was to increase understanding amongst the different stakeholders to build awareness, but also to take action on each one of these areas that would help digital financial services. We have in UNCTAD a multi-year expert meeting that looks at these issues and tries to address the regulatory and institutional weaknesses, because it would be key in future for companies that want to be active in this area to ensure that there is a very secure regulatory and institutional framework and that there is not over-regulation. And so a number of these issues were discussed. We also do a services policy review, which helps to bring the stakeholders together, because we heard here how the role of government is important, but also many services sectors are involved in terms of ensuring that digital financial services would be successful, or any other sector would be successful. So institutional coordination between the different government bodies, between the regulators, and not just sector regulators, but competition regulators and consumer protection groups would be very key in this area. So I just move on to main recommendations to policymakers by the ITU focus group: support an open ecosystem for DFS that promotes innovation and competition, should have accurate and timely information on direct and indirect price consumer pay to access DFS, encourage merchants and other payment acceptors to accept e-payments, encourage and identity systems to help account opening e-payments and security. Public support to DFS is necessary, and leverage existing infrastructure and capabilities to avoid duplication of costs, including using postal networks to support the DFS ecosystem. Now, in terms of trade and trade policy, of course, we know that services to a large extent covers this area, so making commitments in this area, services GATS framework can very much facilitate making DFS-related commitments. We also see in the regional integration agreements that they have gone deeper in terms of making commitments that would facilitate digital financial services. So as we hear often, there's a lot of water still in terms of removing barriers in the context of GATS framework on financial services or on telecommunication and other sectors related to DFS. But what's important is the domestic regulation disciplines that to look carefully there to ensure that non-discriminatory regulations would also not pose undue burden in providing digital financial services. But what's important also is that not all countries are ready to take this kind of commitments to support deeper commitments in this respect, because they don't have the right regulatory framework still in place. So helping them to set the right regulatory framework, and also helping the nascent sectors that and those involved in digital financial services in developing countries, I think it would provide a comfort zone to go ahead and be more proactive in this market, but also open it up and liberalize it. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mina, for a very complete presentation. We have discussed challenges that the private sector is facing, and also the challenges from the public sector, like formulating digital policy or e-commerce policy from a trade angle. Now let's open the floor and hear what you have to say from the floor. The panelists are very keen to listen to that. Thank you.
Thank you for your presentation. I learned a lot, especially from the government perspective, what policies can be implemented. It was very useful. And I have a question, especially I'm interested in ensuring security. So first question is to a speaker from in general ePayment. So on the first page of the presentation, it says 20% of people drop their order at the checkout out of security reasons. So do you address, like, how do you address these security issues? And is there anything the government can do in terms of creating environment where people can use e-payments without security concerns? And this is also related to the presentation from UNCTAD, because in the slide I saw one of the policy suggestions to increase security is encourage identity systems. So can you elaborate on what the identity system is? Thank you.
Yeah, thanks a lot for the question. That sounds easy. It's a tough nugget to crack, really. So I wish we could pull it up. Have any of you ever been to a payment page where you just think, ugh, this looks weird, I don't want to pay? Yeah, that's what we're talking about with the security issues. When you don't trust it, when you just have a bad feeling. And there's a lot of that actually goes under the big bucket for the customer online, what we call kind of user experience. So basically, there's a lot of things in that user experience that do create trust. And we focus a lot on that. And it has a lot to do with the design, the layout of the payment page, whether there's a big redirect on the payment page. You click to pay. Does it take you to a whole other website? And then you're like, ooh, what am I paying for? Gah. So that's a lot of the user experience. Now, what creates that user experience has to do with the technology of the payment service provider or the gateway. And it also has to do with the technology of the payment method. Okay? So for credit cards and debit cards, they are processed through acquiring banks. So there's a set of technology there. E-wallets or other local payment methods, everything has its own user experience. Are there any Dutch in the room? No? Oh, wow, I'm surprised. Okay. The Dutch have a very particular local one. Has anyone used Sofort? Anyone use Sofort as a payment method? No? Okay. Just throwing some out there. PayPal. Some people have used PayPal? Yeah. So PayPal is a different environment where you make the payment, right? So all of that environment where you make the payment, that creates trust. Now, how can governments support creating a more high trust environment? That's really tricky. So I would say that really, again, where I had that slide about the stages of business growth and really suggesting the local areas of focus that would be the most impactful is focusing on the startup phase, the local phase. So for companies that are in your country where they're connecting to a payments network, I would look at what are the options, what's the user experience these companies have as options that relate to that payments network. And I would just reach out, if I were in the shoes of the government, I would reach out to those payment methods, the technical gateways, and ask them what help they need to increase the experience. I can't tell you specifically, but it's always worth having a conversation. Yeah.
I think from the point of view of an actual merchant, I mean, what you're talking about, it's something that is a lot more in control of the person that is actually sort of presenting what you see on it. Like, for example, when we talked earlier about numbers and we were talking about e-wallets sort of growing as a share of the market, they may not be growing necessarily because they are actually people are trying to keep the money electronically. It's just because it becomes something familiar. It becomes a way where the person says, okay, I don't trust you to give you my credit card details. I don't trust you to give me all of this information. However, I do have this extra layer here that is actually going to allow me to do that. I think from the point of view of... sorry? I think from the point of view of regulation, it's very tricky, but it's because at the same time that, Maeve asked the question, okay, how many of you dropped out of a page because it looked icky? So how many of you dropped out of it just because you couldn't figure it out? By the time that you get there and you have to enter this here, you have to enter it there, and after you have clicked God only know how many things, you go like, okay, how does it become relevant? So even from the point of view of the merchant, and this is one of the things when I was talking about of everyone having to have an input into this, as important as it is for the person that is sitting on the one side of this to have the feeling that is actually secure, from the point of view of the merchant, it is very important that it's something that is actually simple enough that people would actually engage and use.
I would like to just actually respond to that. So Gustavo works for an e-commerce company, and so, typically we work with companies like him. And one of the indicators you were telling me about earlier, what did you guys call it? The indicator of customer conversion.
PCR, basically out of the people that land on the booking page, on the people that land on the booking page, the amount of people that actually complete a transaction.
Right. And so companies and e-payment providers, we're constantly working to improve customer conversion. And, actually it's interesting because one of the things I was just thinking, how can governments help? Well, honestly, having a very competitive landscape for payments drives everyone to do better. So how governments can help is creating a flourishing e-payments landscape in your country, which drives innovation, I would say. Anyway.
On the question about identity systems. So it's just identity systems that are capable of identifying end users and their providers, authentication systems capable of recognizing and validating their identity. So it can be national IDs, sectorial IDs, private sector IDs, like WeChat or PayPal identifiers. The sectorial IDs would be bank account numbers, mobile phone numbers, and some national IDs in particular are biometrical, so that would help also. Biometrical. Enabled, yes, biometrical enabled. So that's what I meant by.
Yes, thank you. My name is Marie Sikat. I'm with UNCTAD. I coordinate UNCTAD's ICT policy review program. It was mentioned by Torbjörn earlier today. Thank you very much for the very interesting and insightful presentations. I thought I would perhaps just also highlight about the role of synergies between the growth of different industries and the role that can play in also helping to strengthen digital financial services delivery. For example, I'm just taking some examples from some of the findings which we've found from the case of Egypt. We've been developing the national e-commerce strategy for Egypt. It's just nearly about completed. We actually just presented it to the Egyptian minister last week. We will provide the full presentation and the publication during UNCTAD e-commerce week in April. But one example in terms of synergies between industries, for example, is the role of the fintech industry. In Egypt, one of the areas of strength that we've identified is the ICT sector. They have quite a strong ICT sector. and in terms of software development, in terms of IT talent, engineers. And the fintech industry has actually played a very important role in helping to strengthen the financial services in many different levels. For example, it is actually a fintech company which is providing the national switch for the banking system in Egypt. And so at the very high level, the fintech is helping to grow the financial services sector, and also at the level of small businesses. For example, we met with a fintech company called DoPay, and this was a fintech which was basically they had developed a software which was providing the opportunity for small businesses to roll out an electronic payroll system, which in Egypt is normally a very manual, paper-based system, and it's actually very inefficient, it's prone to error, it's very slow, tedious, and through the software system and through cooperation with the central bank and with the banking system, they were able to arrange for this payroll system, electronic, to be brought to many of these small companies which otherwise would never have the opportunity to deliver this kind of service to their companies. And so it's just an example of the type of role that the synergy between one growing industry can have on the digital financial services industry. And perhaps I'll also just put in a plug for the ICT Policy Review Program. It's a program which our work is primarily based on we use a integrated diagnostic tool which examines how to strengthen e-commerce in a country on the basis of 8 major areas. Some of these are very similar to some of the ones which were mentioned just now. It's ICT infrastructure, logistics, payment services. We also look at, of course, legal and regulatory. There's also the electronic platforms, whether they exist or not, and what type of diversity exists in terms of platforms. There's also skills development, awareness raising, which also includes a lot of the consumer awareness issues, which is also a very important area for electronic payments. It was highlighted here, many of the barriers are actually cognitive barriers. Some of them, it's about skills development. If you have basic literacy problems, you can't even use an ATM machine, which can be, if you need to read instructions, that can be a major problem. And as well, we find that a lot of the barriers are basically just resistance to change. Many people just many people and businesses don't want to change the way they go shopping or the way they conduct business. So a lot of it is just at a very basic level of changing old habits, of changing traditional centuries-long habits. And but it's a very, very hard barrier to overcome. And so that's part of the awareness raising. We also look at e-procurement as well. And so it's basically making use of that integrated diagnostic tool. And should you like any further information, we'll be presenting the Egyptian strategy in April. And you can also find more information about the ICTPR program on the UNCTAD website. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Anybody?
Gracias, Presidente. Thank you, Chairman. Ms. Mina Mashayeki made reference to the fragmentation of standards amongst the various operators. Here it is quite clear that we have the ITU's role, WIPO's role, and other organizers of this conference, such as WTO and UNCTAD. They have spoken of the need for cooperation between regulators and operators in various countries, and also the necessary cooperation amongst organizations organizing discussions on this. Do you think also we need more cooperation in this realm? Thank you.
you think, sorry, your last thing was, do I think you need cooperation in this?
This field, in this field or in this realm or field, more cooperation amongst the bodies tackling these subjects, the ones I mentioned, such as WTO, UNCTAD, etc., WIPO.
Yes, definitely. I mean, that's what the point I'm raising, that, you know, for example, of course, many of the actors that were in PAFI were also like in the ITU focus group I was mentioning, and also private sector, MasterCard, Ericsson, all the major players were there, and the idea was to bring some, you know, understanding amongst all of them, the countries at different levels of development, the standard setting agencies, the agencies that work on development, the agencies, and it included also World Bank and everything. So there is already a lot of cooperation and coming together. But I think as this whole business is going to scale up, and as so much data and information in enormous amounts is going to be exchanged, and you want to take decisions based on evidence and transparency, you need even to scale up the cooperation, but with coherence, because you can cooperate but still each go your own way. But to bring coherence and really ensure that all players know the impact of what they're going to do, which is difficult because, like I think it was mentioned, that you do certain things, then the European Court is faced with something that, I mean, do the regulators, can they regulate such a market actually? Do they have the skills of the future? So there is a whole questioning about what institutions you need in future, what business models you need in future. Even the firms themselves, I mean, like large firms are saying, the life of each firm is becoming shorter and shorter. You have some MNEs that are living a long time, let's say Nestle and those traditional ones, and the rest are just living maybe 4 or 5 years, 10 years. So how do you work in such an environment, changing environment, needs a lot of coherence and a lot of cooperation. That's why I mentioned again the goals, SDGs, because what is interesting about SDGs is that more and more of the private sector firms refer to it. So these objectives are the development objectives. So then you have to bring it together with private sector objectives, bring it together with institution building, because role of government matters, the institution building. Bring it together with, that all countries want development, so poor people want access to all these very good things, and they want things to adapt to their needs, savings, all the innovative things to come up, so they can also they have savings, but they want to be sure what they put in is sure. They're not going to fail, So making sure that those businesses won't fail. So it's all, quite a very complex area. So definitely we need to all cooperate more, but cooperate more with coherence, not duplicate. And of course, standard setting bodies that we discussed, ITUs had this focus group as the first stage to, bring more and more standards in future in this area. ISO is working, ANSI is working. Many are working in this field, and it's very important that the standards that are set would not keep developing countries out, of the whole of this very lucrative and interesting business.
Thank you very much. Anybody? Please.
Thank you, Ambassador, and thanks to the panelists for this very interesting presentation. Please, a quick question, and that's specific to MENA, and that is in relation to the role of government. On the one hand, government should not over-regulate, and at the same time, government should not under-regulate. What is the right balance or mix, particularly in relation to the role of government, and also in relation to the commitment that government might have given or undertaken, particularly in relation to that commitment, and how would that play out in terms of creating an environment for business to thrive? Thank you.
Well, it's very difficult to answer that question, but what I would say is that, the right balance you can only get the right balance if you have all the stakeholders involved, So government on its own cannot regulate just taking one set of interests in mind. It has to take all set of interests, let's say the underserved interest in mind, the local companies, the foreign companies' interest in the sense that you want to import, certain things, certain digital, for example, financial services. So you need to also, those who you are potentially interested to import from, to see what barriers could be that could be negative towards that. So I think it's important to have a balanced vision about that, and universal access is very key for firms and also for people. And therefore that is an important objective, but we are saying that you should not go all the extreme to over-regulate. But that balance is not something anybody can give you a recipe about. You can see the different experiences. Kenya has been very successful, but maybe others have been less successful. So you have to devise your own, I think, recipe and magic. Thank you.
Thank you very much. For rulemaking, this sector is really a moving target. Technology is moving so far, so quickly. So the right combination we had to find it. Maybe you can give us some ideas on how you see the future in 5 years.
Sure. Future in 5 years. In what sense?
On what this is developing, where it's going.
Where is payments going in e-commerce?
Yeah.
Well, okay. So, I think I think rather than focusing on what's the future of payments, the first question to really focus on is what's the future of e-commerce, because payments is really just a touch point to ensure the success of e-commerce, really. What we see with trends in e-commerce is a movement towards marketplace aggregation models, and simultaneously governments moving to fight it. So that's kind of weird. I think also the Internet of Things, the connectivity is a huge topic in e-commerce. Essentially moving to having sensors, connected cars, smart objects. Like Amazon released recently this thing called Alexa. It's like a object that you talk to in your home. So that's another thing, combining artificial intelligence with smart objects. I think those are really the main, really big trends. Digital goods and services, and as well the sharing economy. So liberalization of private capital is just a trend that governments are also fighting a lot. And I think these are not going to go away, and I think they need to be managed constructively and fairly. I think that, a big thing is, it's the era, right now it's considered to be a golden age of entrepreneurship. I don't know if anyone has heard that, but in the startup space, everyone's talking about it. This is the golden age. People will talk about this for generations. And along with that golden age is a concept of democratization. A democratization of information, a democratization of private assets. And subsequently, because people want, especially middle-class people who, work so hard to collect assets and then it sits there, they want to be able to have working capital. So that's what you're seeing with e-commerce, is following that drive in the middle class, that middle-class people feel really stuck, they feel trapped, they can't have upward mobility, and they want to have upward mobility. They want to have more financial control over their assets. And this is why these marketplaces are just rising like fire. And if I were to wave a big flag in front of governments, it's don't be afraid of it. Acknowledge it, understand what people want, what they need, and find a way to make it work so it works for everyone. And don't go back to the way, don't try to force things back into the way they were. But it's time to look forward. Times have changed.
I think a great example for that, there was actually sort of a study done about what does it mean to be successful right now and what did it mean to be successful 20 years ago. And 20 years ago, being successful meant to have a stable job, to have your own house and your own car and do these things. And right now, if you go to apply for a job and you've been in a job for more than 3 years, they kind of look at you, what's wrong with you? Most people, I mean, don't even want to own a car. So I think what we're looking is at something that for many years we've been talking about globalization, and sort of things becoming more and more standardized for everyone. And I think what it's actually going to happen, it's an exponential reversed process where everyone, like when we're talking from payment methods, when we're talking from products for everything, there is so much out there. There is so many people working in different things that it's getting to the point that everyone wants what they want, and they want it their own way, and we're basically getting to the point where that's going to be possible. So I think we went to the macro. Now it's going to start going just to the individual.
Last point, yeah, sure.
I just wanted to say that with all this disruptive technology, which brings all these good things that were mentioned, of course, some people think if you have a job for 3 years, what's wrong with you? But at the same time, many people are worried about robotization and artificial intelligence, that actually you may not have any jobs. So I mean, all of this is the trends of future that cause a lot of uncertainty, and maybe for young people, it's still very the way you are saying, but maybe for middle-aged people and is also that, are we going to have a job, or are we going to have a pension? So I hope that technology and innovation would come up with new ideas to also help there with unemployment. And when you pass to robotics, I know that Silicon Valley people are thinking, okay, we can give minimum salaries to everybody. So then, okay, if we all have good minimum salaries, we stay at home, we do the nice things we want to do, and we consume, and we feel very free. That's great. But I just say that this also has very complex
I think, sort of comparing generations, I consider myself what they're calling like the Generation X, in between the baby boomers and now the millennials. And it's very interesting to sort of have one foot in each side of the river. And the thing is, as much as you're talking about, an older generation being worried about, am I going to have a job, this and that. I mean, you have 12, 13-year-olds with Twitter accounts and with Instagrams and whatever actually getting paid for putting pictures forward and whatever it is. So we're talking about going from one extreme of actually thinking that money and all of these things actually had to be earned, and you had to work hard and have an education, where it just becomes as much as an instant satisfaction as a like. It's like, okay, that equals money. It's that simple. So I think it gets even scarier.
Well, thank you very much. I'd like to... You want... Please.
Merci beaucoup, Monsieur l'Ambassadeur.
Thank you very much, Mr. Ambassador. I thank the panelists. I should like to say that I share the viewpoints developed by Ms. Mina of UNCTAD concerning certain aspects, particularly in the digital area, and also the statement she made towards the end of her presentation, saying that regulations should not leave small economies from their field of activity out in terms of the digital economy and e-commerce. That is true, but it is more difficult to do than to say. So I would like to ask this question of the panelists. I'd like to ask this question of each of them. In the field of regulation and the flexibility to be provided to developing countries, particularly the LDCs, if each of you could make one proposal concerning the flexibility to be provided for the least developed countries and to small economies in general in the field of reglementation. Thank you.
You know, the one thing I'll have to say about what would I recommend, look around. Like I said before, PayPal, Facebook, so forth. I mean, most of the multi-million, billion companies that are sitting out there providing all of these services and changing the world, they started in a garage. They started by just simply looking into a need and providing a solution for that. I think one of the biggest mistakes that could be done is to try to take many of these solutions and sort of to apply them to a completely different setting. So I would say probably the best advice would be use your young people, use the people that it's actually sort of going to drive this, you know, make them part of the process. I don't think this is something that it could be found a traditional solution to it. It's something that for each individual has to be as unique to their own condition, their needs, their structures and everything as it is for everyone else.
Thank you very much. We wrapping up the session, and I ask the Ambassador Carao to come here for this following. Thank you.
Well, may I welcome DDG Aga and Dr. Shah. Please come to the podium. This will be a short session. The only thing is you still have to give me a few more minutes of your time. The good news is I'll not be opening the floor, so it will be a fairly short session. 2 speakers and myself the third to just say the final word. So with those words, I would like to welcome to the panel DDG Aga, Excellencies, friends, and that have joined us throughout this long but especially very productive day of the seminar. We would like now, on behalf of the group of e-commerce for development, we would like to thank you all for participating, expressing your interest, and for the constructive discussions that we have had the whole day with regard to e-commerce, what it can do for development and for prosperity. I would like to introduce Deputy Director Aga to give his remarks at this juncture. Thank you.
Thank you, Ambassador. Honorable Minister, ambassadors, speakers, participants, delegates, ladies and gentlemen. This is quite a difficult task. You've been speaking for a whole day. I wasn't able to be in the room with you. I am now being called upon to give a summary of your conversation. So I will do what the Secretariat knows how to do best. Just read my speaking notes. If there are any mistakes, you know who to blame. If there is no priority attached to your work, I hope you also know where to take your concern. So it is an honor for me to be with you today and to take this opportunity to wrap up your event. The diffusion of digital technologies and the digitization of many products and services are transforming international trade. These transformations can make it easier for micro, small, and medium enterprises or even individuals to engage in global commerce. For developing countries, electronic commerce has great potential to boost their integration into the global economy, as well as drive socio-economic development. At the same time, however, there are risks that a failure to foster greater connectivity, including technological capabilities in developing countries, could exacerbate the digital divide. Consistent with what we have heard today, electronic commerce will not deliver its full potential if it is hampered by financial exclusion. Moreover, financial exclusion may take many forms. For example, the World Bank has estimated that more than 200 million formal and informal micro, small, and medium enterprises in emerging economies lack access to basic financial services that could allow them to thrive and grow. In other words, they are financially excluded. No wonder, therefore, that financial inclusion has become a priority for policymakers, regulators, and development agencies globally. And while there has been progress towards financial inclusion, significant development challenges remain. As countries have accelerated efforts towards financial inclusion, it has become apparent that they face hurdles. And these hurdles may include: 1, extending to hard-to-reach populations, including women and the rural poor. 2, increasing financial literacy and capability. 3, providing valid identification documents and low-cost means of authentication. And 4, devising innovative, relevant financial products. However, there is no one-size-fits-all approach to financial inclusion. Hence, the importance of seminars such as this one, which actually bring together 3 strands of work at the WTO: the work on financial inclusion, including digital payments, the work program on electronic commerce, and the discussions on small, medium enterprises. Regarding the issue of payments discussed today, integrating digital payments into the economies of developing nations is crucial for broad economic growth and individual empowerment. Growing evidence from around the world shows how digital payments offer immediate benefits. We have heard that the establishment of digital payments for remittances instead of cash can increase participation in global electronic commerce and can be of enormous benefit to people and MSMEs in developing and least developed economies. This will contribute not only to overall development, but also to the integration of these economies into the global trading system. Nevertheless, it is useful to recall that together with the modernization of the payment infrastructure, regulations play a critical role in determining the success of digital payments and indeed financial inclusion. Current evidence shows that countries that have achieved the most progress towards financial inclusion have put in place an enabling regulatory and policy environment and have encouraged competition, allowing banks and non-banks to innovate and expand. Creating this innovative and competitive space also goes hand in hand with appropriate consumer protection measures. Unfortunately, a significant number of countries, and therefore a large share of populations worldwide, have not yet put in place enabling regulatory environments, or indeed perpetuate regulations that hamper the rollout of digital payment solutions. As shown in this seminar, digital payments facilitate financial inclusion and integration into the global trading system. And in many cases, it has been stimulated by trade and investment from developing countries. While much of this development agenda is and must be domestically driven, the WTO can certainly be part of that agenda and therefore part of the solution. Through its various activities, the WTO offers a suitable framework for addressing many of these issues. It has also become commonplace in the financial inclusion literature to make reference to the need to promote an ecosystem of different players and service suppliers, banks, financial institutions, telecom companies, payment providers, and a myriad of supporting services. I would dare say that WTO members may think of the WTO as providing also an ecosystem approach for development. In other words, a forum where many of the elements of a trade development strategy can be meaningfully integrated and complement national development strategies. Development is one of the paramount objectives of the WTO and must always inform the WTO approach to the various dimensions of trade and policy regulation. I think we can all agree that continued work in the WTO would need to take into account the priorities of developing countries and the capacity constraints that they face. Yet, we should also be cognizant and mindful of the opportunities that international trade can provide for individuals and micro, small, and medium enterprises, not only in developed, but also in developing countries. The work program on electronic commerce, as well as the services discussions and negotiations, provide a framework for exploring not only digital payments, but also now how other services forming part of the financial inclusion ecosystem can be harnessed to make the income and growth opportunities of international trade, including online trade, more readily available to all our members. I am pleased and thankful that the Friends of E-Commerce for Development have been working to bring these issues to the forefront. I am sure that we can all agree that there is a lot of information and knowledge that we need to bring to bear on these topics. So I wish to extend a sincere thanks to the Friends of E-Commerce for Development for hosting this seminar today, to the speakers for their insightful and informative presentations, and to you all for participating and making this seminar a success. Needless to add that we need to be more forward-looking by taking this conversation from a more general level to some specific, clear objectives that we may wish to achieve. I thank you all for your kind attention and wish you the best for your future work. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Didi Aga. As usual, the Secretariat has not let us down. And thank you very much for your very eloquent delivery of their very befitting summary. I would like now to pass on the floor to my colleague, the Ambassador of Pakistan to the WTO, who has indeed been our undisputed leader of the group of Friends of E-Commerce for Development, His Excellency Dr. Takwal Shah, for his comments on this very long day of exchanges of views. Dr. Shah.
Thank you, Dr. Stephen. It has been a long and intense day, but let me start on a lighter note. Have you heard about reverse e-commerce? One of my friends said the reverse e-commerce is that you sell before you buy. You take a picture, upload it, sell it, get money, go and buy the product and then send it to your customer. So these are the type of challenges, those said jokingly, but this is the reality, that in e-commerce, the challenge is the trust. Or is it really happening what you intend to do, be it the payment? And this is the thing which was echoing throughout the deliberations today, that trust, and especially when it comes to payment systems, and especially for people in LDCs in developing countries for whom maybe it's a first transaction they're making online. So I'll just share some takeaways that I noted. One, we heard from DG and the Minister of Costa Rica that the important link between digital financial services, financial inclusion and development, and how digital financial services or payment systems stand at the heart of e-commerce. Secondly, we heard very strongly from our esteemed guest from Kenya, Professor Jugwana, that how important is the role of government and the regulators. And then regulator who knows the understanding of innovation, of technology, of nurturing the private sector, and how to have this balance between your policy interest, your interest of the customers, citizens, but at the same time giving ample space for innovation to the private sector. Then, very importantly, we heard from our friend Hamid and his colleagues about financial services and telecom services aspect of GATS and how it provides room without even going into new negotiations of creating an environment for e-commerce and how to do it better. Then at the same time, I would say that one of the takeaways was that we have heard a lot in our deliberations on e-commerce development about technical assistance for LDCs and developing countries. And hearing what we heard today, especially from our friend from private sector, I think technical assistance for this purpose would not be a piece of cake. It would be very challenging for all organizations, including WTO, who designed this for LDCs in developing countries. There are challenges of global nature, and this would be a real challenge how to design it for LDCs who are not really there on e-commerce. We heard some good stories about challenges and opportunities from Pakistan and Kenya in the field of e-commerce. The statistics aspect of e-commerce, as they say, if you can't measure something, you can't deliver it. So this challenge really came up, that measuring e-commerce is a big challenge. Other than this, we heard about this $1 trillion investment infrastructure gap we have in developing countries, and this has been echoed by our friends from LDCs in developing countries time and again, that this digital divide, which is primarily because of the lack of infrastructure. So by and large, I think these were the key takeaways of today's meeting. And this is the main objective of Friends of E-Commerce for Development, that we keep this dialogue going and to understand different aspects and dimensions and challenges that we have to face while discussing about our future work on e-commerce in WTO. In the end, I would particularly like to thank Professor Jugwana from Kenya, and I must mention our friend Gustavo from Go Euro. 11 o'clock last night, we heard that there are no flights coming from Berlin. There was a strike. And then we heard that Gustavo is driving down to Geneva, and here we had him early morning after 12 hours of drive. So special thanks for you. So I think you are the right person to bust fraud on e-commerce with this type of determination, and we really like your commitment to your work. I would especially thank World Bank, WTO Secretariat, UNCTAD, who we call the Friends of E-Commerce for Development, who have been always there to support us. And once again, we look forward to a couple of more activities before summer, which we'll soon inform you, and which we are in the process of designing. And once again, thanks a lot for a very engaged participation. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Shah. We might do the magic of finishing the meeting before time. We were scheduled to finish at 17:55, but from the look of things, we'll make it. I've done a quick count, and it gives me a number of just over 60 in the room. And that is a very nice performance. When the going gets tough, the tough get going. So well done. I congratulate you all for your stamina. And I would therefore like to say again a big thank you for all of you for your interest and for being there the whole day. Let us keep up the good work. Let's not forget that e-commerce is here to stay. Is a train that has already taken off and is a train that we need to be on board. For my good brother from Benin, I think the advice to the floor is when we were starting all this, we were told a lot about the knowledge gap among us, particularly those from Africa. And we decided then the best thing is to just fill that gap. Thank you for coming. Thank you for those of you who have heeded to this call. This is part of the way to go. And as you have also heard, some of these things start from the workshop at the backyard. So let's not make it a Herculean task. We can get going. So with these many words and at the risk of passing the clock, may I say I would like in a special way to also thank Costa Rica for all the efforts that they have put in to make this seminar a success. Their minister is always at the forefront. This is the second seminar workshop that is attending with us, and we thank them most sincerely. I would also like to thank the WTO for all their efforts and support. I'd like to thank UNCTAD. Again, pass our regards to the Secretary General. We are very grateful. We look forward to the last week of April when we will have another workshop. I thank the translators and all the staff who have made this a reality. I would have led you in a clap, but traditionally in the WTO we are not too used to clapping, but we are used to doing the hammer when the meeting or the session is coming to an end. So I'm very happy to have the honor to close the seminar for today. Thank you once again, and welcome.
Congratulations, Balozi.
We done? Thank you.
Thank you.